To building in AI over the last few years, more specifically the last 9 months engineering AI agents, I noticed something quite obvious that most large language models are quite useless in the business world. We even see that in multiple reportings. Unless we do one particular thing, well, we add agent skills into the mix. So in today's video, I quickly want to break down what agent skills are, some design considerations, and then ultimately give some sort of an overview for your agentic systems. So let me rephrase it in other words. What is an agent skill? An agent skill is essentially the tacit knowledge of an employee or a human professional that you can then inject into an agentic system. Let me break that down just step by step. What is tacit knowledge? Tacit knowledge is, for example, the workflows within a company. It's the way of doing business in a particular role. It's pretty much put in other words, like you would have a new joiner and you give this particular new joiner all the templates, all the way this company works. And many of these elements you can actually engineer as an agentic skill. Because ultimately what you would want to have kind of a digital version of a physical human employee, but in form of an AI agent. And it only makes sense that this particular AI agent actually gets access to the same tacit knowledge like a human. But more on that just in a second. Very high level, an agentic skill is essentially nothing else than pretty much just a file. It's not rocket science. The way you actually describe it, it is more or less a little bit of a description what a particular skill needs to be executed with. That's exactly why we have these 3 levels, also explaining the Anthropic post I was describing before. Usually have some sort of metadata. That's pretty much just a description of the skill. You have some sort of instructions that are pretty much just in Markdown, and more on that just in a second. Ideally, don't make it too long because you don't want to fill up the context window too much with all these particular skills flying around. So one of the rules of thumbs is probably around 5K tokens. I would even put it a little bit down to, for example, being 4 to 5 A4 pages in Arial 12 font as being your skill instructions. And then on top of that, on L3 or on the 3rd level of an agentic skill, you can have unlimited resources, code, and even examples that you can actually ship along with the skill. But if we go back quickly to the Claude API docs by Anthropic, you'll see exactly these 3 levels. Once again, just describe a little bit more in detail. You usually have a name of a description of the skill, as well as like what the skill is really all about. This really helps the agent or your large language model to figure out, once there's a particular inbound question by a user, which skill do I need to pull into the context window? Secondly, you have level 2, which is pretty much the instructions. This is kind of the tacit knowledge if you want. It's in the description, it's some code, maybe alternatively how do you generate an advanced Excel model, elements like this, which formulas to use, which design systems, and much more. But I have a few examples for that prepared later on. And then level 3 is where it's becoming really interesting because you can even add resources and or code attached to an agentic skill. What I mean by that, similar to the example I've just did before with a new joiner joining a law firm, for example, you would also probably hand this new joiner some sort of a template, or for a typical case, this is more or less how we write an email, and you just fill up, well, the tacit knowledge with an agent in a very similar way, right? So level 3 is all about resources, all about examples that you can attach to an agentic skill. And that's probably where most of the value then really sits behind the curtains. Here, just in other words, right, you have the metadata, just to sum it up, around 100 tokens. You don't want to make it too long, because if you make it too long, the agent doesn't actually find the skill when it needs it to execute a particular task. Secondly, again, level 2 is instructions. It's pretty much actually what is being executed when skills are being triggered. And then 3rd is the resources. And just a small caveat here, if you're an AI builder as well, you probably have some sort of a restricted context window to work with. And if you're completely new to context windows, here's another truly important blog post from Anthropic, basically describing that just in a nutshell. Everything that's flowing into the context window has some sort of limitations. A context window is not infinite. It's around 1 million tokens for most of the models. And as you can see here in regard to context engineering, you would also want to make sure that whatever flows into the context window coming from a skill is not just overflooding the context window. A context window can inherit anything from documents, from tools, memory files, and even the message history, but just more on that maybe in a future video. In particular, the component I was mentioning just at this very moment is on the 3rd level, when you have some sort of execution-based code, or you have a file, or there's some sort of analysis actually happening based on what you have on level 3, this is actually not flowing back into the context window. That's really, really an important element as well. So there is no particular element that this is being consider to be in the context, only the result will be. And that makes skills truly unique, right? Because you can actually attach an array of particular code executables or even other scripts that you can then basically be running outside of the context window and only really give the feedback from the executable code back into the context window. But that's just some technical shenanigans, just to mention that here briefly. Let me quickly go back and actually describe a little bit what are possible skills that you can really be considering aside from some technical nuances. Ultimately, I mentioned it at the beginning of the video, an agentic skills really enables the business value realization via tacit knowledge injection into the agent. In other words, we give the agent once again all the particular information it needs to execute business value and to execute business workflows. Here's just some general skills I would usually probably consider when you're building any particular agentic system to be loaded in as agentic skills. The first one, for obvious reasons, might be Excel or spreadsheets. You need to give the agent the capability to generate an Excel or to generate a Word document or a PowerPoint slide or PDF processing. This might sound a little bit over-engineered, but if you're actually building your own agentic AI product and you're not relying on Claude Code or on Claude Cowork, well, you actually have to build that yourself. So you have to make sure that all the agentic skills you first build for yourself. There's some templates out there. I put them in the description of the video here. But generally speaking, all the agentic skills that you would want for your AI product kind of need to more or less build yourself, especially if it's in regard to a particular use case. Nevertheless, all these four, let's say, general purpose business skills, probably every AI agent software needs nowadays. Again, Excel, Word document, PowerPoint, and PDF processing. These are the four you probably would load automatically. Secondly, you might have actually some use case in regard to some analysis that can be anything from marketing to sales to finance to accounting to compliance in banking, insurance, whatever it is. There's probably some sort of skill where the agent needs to do an analysis, and you can write a skill how the agent should be doing this particular analysis. Same on deep research, and then more specialized artifact creation. What do I mean by that? Even if you have a general purpose Excel spreadsheet skill, that is all great and all good for the AI agent, so it can build general purpose Excel. So it's pretty much just giving a human access. Here is Excel and more or less just build anything. This particular skill, specialized artifact creation, you would then basically be saying, okay, when this is triggered, it should build a leverage buyout model for a private equity company, or it should build a particular compliance matrix for an insurance company, or a particular compliance check with all these tabs and all these, let's say, design formats for a particular insurance case or a sales case or anything in between. So this is a little bit more than nuanced on top engineering. This one here, it's just the way it should actually operate and generate in Excel. And if you haven't yet seen that behind the scenes, an AI agent generates Excel by writing code. So this is pretty much just the way to explain. You should probably write Python code, you should use this and this and this library to then ultimately generate an Excel spreadsheet. So that's the technical nuances to simply generate the spreadsheet. And this one here is actually the artifact that you would need for your agentic AI use case. Then ultimately, maybe you have some workflow automation that you also want to do. And with this particular skill, you can actually embed the tacit knowledge, or let's say the workflow knowledge, into this particular skill. Once again, you can attach on level 3 also some resources and some additional code. So it should execute once it actually decides, well, I should probably use this particular skill. And then lastly, before I continue with the 7 skills on, for example, sales or GTM or later on with law, let me quickly go back to Anthropic and just quickly display this as well. So there is, of course, some other documentations how to actually be using the skill. One really, really important component, if you're an AI builder, you should probably have some sort of mechanism that, okay, once the skill is created, how is the skill being updated? How is it being retrieved? And there is a little bit of a more technical understanding. Okay, maybe you have some sort of different types of versions of a particular skill and you would want to track that. So that's pretty much just explained in this blog post as well. Really, really importantly, skills are loaded. Once again, you have some sort of metadata discovery, so make the skill as descriptive as possible, and then you need to load it into a particular container, for example. Then there's some use cases, but these use cases I more or less covered already. Now, the good thing with Anthropic, they gave us some free skills to use as well. And I'll put that in the description as well. So all these skills, pretty much like the algorithmic art, canvas design, Claude API usage, for example, that is of course handy. But an MCP builder skill, for example, of course, the skill creator skill might actually be super handy when it comes to that. So definitely check that out. You can be, of course, using and leveraging AI agents to generate new skills. So this is exactly becoming handy for this, and an array more, because ultimately you don't have to skill engineer everything from scratch. So these are coming out of the box by Anthropic. But let me quickly go back to the last two examples I would want to give. If you have an agentic system that's, for example, in regards to sales or go-to-market or GTMs, or ultimately you're helping builders or founders or even small businesses actually sell their services and sell their product and sell their software, you would probably want to have some sort of skills being loaded in your own agentic SaaS that looks on the Notion like these 7 ones here. You probably have a skill on ICP definition. Who is your ideal customer profile? You probably have a skill on prospecting. How do you actually do prospecting? What is really the best nuances here? Account research, qualification, signal-based outbound, some sort of outreach strategy in general, and meeting prep. So let me put it another way. You're basically selling your agentic SaaS to all these founders, all these businesses, not only because you have some sort of a mechanism to trigger a large language model and it's secure and it's compliant and it's fully managed, but also because you actually embaked all this tacit knowledge into your system. This is ultimately your unique value proposition on top of everything else. Same for law firm agents. Once again, your ICP or your target customer as a builder could be, for example, that you're selling into smaller law firms. These law firms can't buy a Harvey, can't buy an enterprise license of a larger AI player. That's exactly when you come in. But ultimately, the tacit knowledge layer you're then enabling these law firms is a client intake and conflict check skill, a legal research and memo skill, contract drafting, e-discovery, regulatory compliance, for example, with SEC, contract review, time entry and billing review, whatever else. The array of skills you can essentially be building is truly limitless. Ultimately, you probably have in your agentic system a menu of a different array of skills that are being shipped alongside your product. Just in this example, you probably have some Anthropic pre-built skills. These are the ones I just mentioned before, for example, here on GitHub. There might be some other ones that you're leveraging or they're coming out in the near future. You probably have some sort of skills on scheduling, maybe some sales plugins, as I just mentioned before, and maybe even some finance plugins. Ultimately, the sky is the limit, and the only thing you actually have to maintain and manage is version all these skills, make sure they're up to date, make sure they're in itself making sense, and your agentic system is pulling them into the context window when it sees them fit to be used based on the query of the user. And if you ask me personally, in March 2026 is probably exactly the element that we've been waiting for. As AI builders, we can now generate the skills, couple and combine it with the agentic software that we've been building over the last few months, and then ultimately unlocking all this business value. And just before I close the video, this whole science of which skill is being used when and combined with what tool, with what memory, and much more is actually this whole notion of harness engineering. I put a video on the screen here as well on that. And with that being said, this is more or less a wrap up of agentic skills. Again, being fully compliant and fully relying on the notions here of Anthropic, of why do we use skills, what is really the helpful benefit of it, and the way you can engineer them into your agentic AI system. And with that being said, see you in the next video. Take care.